Hi, and welcome to part two of this Automate Your Active Directory with PowerShell series. So today is going to be the first video where we actually start coding. So the first part that I really like to do, like I said in the last video, is to really break down the bigger problem into smaller problems. So we already know that we want to be able to automate Active Directory using this file, this CSV file. So we already know some of our first steps. So I'm just going to create some steps here as comments. So we know that the first step is going to be load in the CSV file for employees. We know that the second step is going to be to load in the employees already in Active Directory. And our third step, since we really want to know if we ever have to add or delete or modify employees, we're going to want to compare those. So we know that at least we already know 3 of our steps. We're going to be working on step 1 today, so we're just going to be loading in the CSV file for our employees. So what we're going to want to do here, we already know the basic command for importing a CSV file, so let's do that. Import CSV, and then we already know the path here, which is going to be C \data and \employees for me. And we know that the delimiter for my file here is just a comma. I don't actually have to put the delimiter since comma is the default, but we're going to put it in here and we're going to look at see what it gives us. So right now we see that it does import the files. Most people would stop here and move on to the next step. I'm not a big fan of leaving it just like this because we already know um, in Active Directory, if we open up a user here, we know like here it says first name and first name, but if we actually do a get AD user here on our identity of, I believe it's Tucker F on the jacked.ca domain here, we can actually see that the first name is not actually stored as first name. It's stored as given name, and we have surname for the last name, and there's a few other differences. So what I like to do is I like to import the file with the proper properties. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to do a select object here, and then we're going to pass in property. Now, what we could do is we could just do employee ID. We could select all the properties, but again, that's not going to change the name of them. So what I'm going to do just for you guys here is I'm going to do a backtick so I can go on to the next line and start typing these out. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make basically an array of hash tables, which are going to let us create different headers. We've seen this in one of the videos already on how to make custom columns when you're doing a select object. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the @ symbol and some curly braces. And then what we're going to do, the first one here is going to sound pretty pointless to do, but I like to do this just in case your file ever changes. Let's say your HR department decides to change what they call the employee ID field and they change it to something a little bit more cryptic like emp ID or position or employee number or something. You want to be able to easily change that. So what we're going to be doing here, and I'm going to explain this in just a second, is we are going to be taking, so what this means is we're going to be creating a new column called employee ID, and we're going to take in the piped in value of employee ID. Now, this sounds kind of dumb. You won't really see too much of a difference here if we run this. We just have employee ID, but employee ID was already a field in our file, so that doesn't change much. Where it's going to start changing is the first name. So let's actually go ahead and let's put a other property here. We're just going to copy paste that here, and we're going to put this as given name, and we're going to want the value for given name to be first name. And now if we run this here, we actually see that we get employee ID and given name. So basically all you want to do here is you just want to do these for all the fields. I've actually already went ahead and wrote these out here. So let me just bring them in. Just going to give you a few seconds here to just look at that. So we have given name as the first name, surname as the last name, title as title, department as department. And in the last one here, I'm actually referencing the AD property of physical delivery office name, and we're passing in the office property. So now if we run this here, we're going to see that we actually get the same data back with just different headers. And these headers are actually going to match the headers inside of our Active Directory. So this is going to let us be able to compare a lot better later on when we actually want to. So this is a little bit of thinking ahead that requires this, but definitely pays off. And I mean, if you would have went a little bit further on, you could have figured that out, and then you might want to come in and change it. It doesn't really require too much work if you're coming back to do it later. But if you already know ahead of time that you're going to be working with Active Directory, you're going to want to match those fields as best as possible and as early as possible to reduce your amount of work later on. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to simplify this so it doesn't take up 9 lines of code. You could have it in one line, but then you'd have to horizontally scroll, and that's just not fun. So let's go ahead and let's see what we can do to shrink this here. So we know that we're doing a select object property, and then we're passing it an array of hash tables. And in those hash tables, we have another object here in expression. And in an expression, we already know that this is a script block. So, and the way that we can tell this is actually if we just do this here, we can see that if we do a get type on this, we actually see that it is a hash table. And then if we just do a get type on this here, we see that it is a script block. And then we know that arrays are basically comma, validated, separated lists here. So if we actually had a bunch of these here, so let's actually just put in 2 of these. Doesn't really matter that they're the same. We're just going to wrap them in quotes, in parentheses here. And we're going to do a get type on here. And then we see here that it is an array. So we have an array of hash tables, and inside the hash tables, we have a script block. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to simplify this by actually dynamically creating this list here. And this way in the future, if you ever add or remove columns in your files or columns that you want to check, you can easily do that. So what we're going to want to go ahead and do here is we're going to want to create a hash tables of mapping the fields in your CSV file to the fields in Active Directory. So what we're going to do here, we're going to call this a sync field map, and we're going to make this equal to a hash table. Right off the bat, we're just going to make it a hash table because we know that these columns are unique, because in a CSV file, your columns do have to be unique here. And what we're going to do is we're going to put in all of our columns. And these are the columns that are going to be in your CSV file. So I know that I have a last name, a title, a department, and I have an office. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make them equal to the Active Directory field. And again, these are going to be separated. In a hash table, they don't actually have to be separated by commas. So that's okay. So what we're doing here is we're just making sure that we're writing it the exact same way that it is in Active Directory here. So we have our title, then we have our department, and then we have our physical delivery office name. So if we run this here, now we have a hash table. Now we're not done yet, but this is going to be primarily the place if you want to add eventually a manager, or if you want to add a street, or if you want to add other variables to check. This is really where you're going to add them in or remove them. Or if your column changes in your CSV file, this is where you're going to change it. If they change it to just first, you're going to change first name to first, and then your script is still good. You don't have to go in and find every time that you're referencing this. We're going to be using the sync field map quite a bit in this project here. So what we're going to do here is now we're going to create, we're going to enumerate through these different hash tables, hash table values. So we're going to do sync properties equals sync field map. Oops. Sync properties equals sync field map dot get enumerator. So this is going to enumerate through all the different keys in your sync field map. So if we run this here and we just look at sync properties, so we actually see we have the name and we have the value of the hash table. That's great. So what we're going to do is now we're going to create a variable called properties. And this is actually going to store our array. And our array, as we know, is going to be a bunch of different hash tables and script blocks. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do it equal to a for each. And we're going to do for each property in sync properties, because we want to loop through all the values that it enumerated through. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to load in this array full of hash tables. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the @ symbol and the curly brackets. So we already have something that's going to generate us an array of empty hash tables. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to populate this exactly as we are doing here. So we're going to put name equals, and then that's going to equal the property, and that's going to equal the property value, because we know that the property value here, actually, if we just go here and we're just going to run this real quick, because as we know, we're going to be able to actually see what our values are. So we're going to do property, and then we have name, key, and value. We're going to set it to value here, and we're going to just look at see what it is. So we know that the value is actually going to be title, which doesn't really help us too much here. But if we actually just run this again, and now we look at properties, we actually see here that we have tons of names uh, in our array of hash tables, and we see that the name is properly given. So all these names here are the names that we want to give our values. So it comes out looking the same as just if we were doing the names here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put our semicolon, and then we're going to put our expression. And now we know that inside here, it's a script block. So we actually have to create a script block. Now, the way that we're going to do that is we've seen square brackets calling for casting. So we're going to do a script block, colon, and we're going to do a create. Now this is going to let us create a script block. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put some double quotes in there just because we're going to be putting a string. And now we're going to want to do the backtick and then a $_ dot. Now what this is going to do, the backtick is an escape character because if we just put the $, it's going to think we're referencing a variable, which we're not. And then you're going to want to do a $parentheses because now we actually want to reference a variable. And we're going to put property dot key because this key is going to be the employee ID, first name, last name, title, department, and office. So now if we run this here and then we look at properties, we actually see that we do have a bunch of values here. So we have our expression and our name for department. So when a department comes in, it's going to take the piped in department. When we want to do a surname, it's going to take the piped in last name, which is exactly what we want. So this is awesome. So what we're going to want to do here, just to finalize this, is see if we can do an import CSV and pass in this array of properties. So let's do that here, and let's do properties, and let's see how this looks. And it worked great. So this is really the first part. So what we're going to want to do here, just to really finish it up, is we're going to want to put this into a nice function. So let's go ahead and let's do that here. So what we're going to want to do is let's just create the function down here, and we can remove all the rest of the stuff later on. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a get employee from CSV, and then we're going to do a commandlet binding. This is just as if we were creating a function like we've seen in the custom functions tutorial. And then we're going to give it some parameters. And now we're going to give it some parameters because what we want the user to obviously do is we're going to want to accept a file path, a delimiter, and then the properties. So what we're going to want to do here is we are going to want to go ahead and create some parameters. So let's do some square brackets here. And we're going to put parameter. And all these fields are going to be mandatory because we do not want to assume these variables with default values. And they really can't be left out because if we leave them out, well, you're not going to be able to load in your things properly. And we're just going to put in some restrictions here. So the first one that we obviously need is going to be a file path here. So let's do, let's call this variable file path. And then we're just going to copy paste this here because we know that they're all going to be mandatory. And let's do this here as a delimiter, which is also going to be a string. And then we are going to do this as our sync field map. And this, we know that we're going to be passing in a hash table. So these are all the parameters that we really want to pass it in here. And then what we're going to want to do, kind of like what we've seen before, is we want to make sure that we have some error handling. This way we know that the user is going to be given a nice error message if for some reason something fails. So what we're going to do is we're going to already put in a try catch statement here. And we're just going to do a write error in the catch statement. And we are just going to pass in or pass through the exception message. We just want to really output the same messages that the system would give us. So now what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to basically, so we know that we want this, we just want the user to pass this in. We're going to take care of making it and creating it there. So we're just going to want to bring this in. So we are going to We're going to take the sync field map, we're going to enumerate it, we're going to create the properties for it. And then what we're going to want to do is we are then going to want to import our CSV file here. And then for this, we are going to change that to file path, and we're going to change that to delimiter. And there we are. So that should be good. So if we actually just run this here, we need to run this in order for it to load into our Active Directory, our PowerShell, sorry. So now if we do a get employee from CSV, sometimes I've made some typos in the past. No. So a thing that you're going to notice here is if you do load in, you're not going to get any error messages if you do this. But if you type in a dash and you don't get any of your parameters coming up, it's usually because of a typo. I'm going to leave this in the video just so you guys do see that this is fairly normal. You guys will make typos. It's really just to get really good at trying to find these. So here I see here that parameter actually does have a typo in every single one because I copy pasted it with a typo. So let's actually just run this again. And now if we do the dash, we get our file path, our delimiter, and our sync field map. So let's give it a file path and let's put in our file path. Obviously in your script, you could use a variable for this, but I just want to show you that we can actually just pass in our values here. And then our sync field map, we are going to pass through our sync field map variable. So if we do that here, we see that it does work and we do get our employees back. So that is awesome here. So let's actually just go ahead and we are going to remove all of this stuff here, except for our sync field map, because we're going to want to keep that because that is a value that we do need. So there we are. And we're just going to put this at the bottom here, just because we know that this is a value that we're going to want to keep. And we're just going to put these at the above here. It's basically what this is going to do is going to have all of our functions and then our main script at the bottom, because what we're eventually going to do is make this script a module. So that's really it for today. So if we just run this here, we're going to see that it does still work. So everything is nice and working. In the next video, we're going to see how we load in our employees from Active Directory. And then in the video after that, we're going to learn how to compare them. As you can see, like these videos are still fairly lengthy and they're definitely packed with information. So make sure you go through this video, maybe watch it 1 or 2 times, just really understand it. Maybe try and load in the Active Directory employees before the next video, but I'll be going over that in the next video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.